So it's 12 now, so I think we are going to get started. Quick introduction from me. My name is Kelsey. I will be sort of emceeing the event, managing questions, responding to your comments in the chat, and asking Nick and Ian the questions when they pop up as well. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Ian to introduce the session and introduce Nick. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Kelsey, and welcome everybody. Good afternoon. I'm going to keep this introduction relatively short because I know you're all very keen to listen to what Nick has to say. But I just wanted to tell you a little bit about how this webinar came about and a little bit about us. So we are a relatively new company, a data and analytics consultancy. And we've been around for 15 months, but our experience spans much more than that. And in fact, we've been using Power BI since it was first released in 2015. And we've trained over 11,000 people in Power BI. But we're not just about Power BI. We focus very much on data visualization principles as well, which is obviously the topic of today. Our watchwords there are quality, integrity, respect, which means that we try to deliver world-class services in a totally open and honest manner that respect our clients' time and money. And we measure ourselves against those things, and where we don't measure up, we try to improve. We focus on training and coaching, but also do consultancy services and innovation services. And as it says at the bottom there, we help organizations get the most out of their data by using Power BI and associated technology. So not just Power BI, maybe Fabric, it may be Matillion or Snowflake, but we are focusing on the end results because at the end of the day, that's what is important. Just wanted to bring up this slide showing our training courses because I want to focus in on one of them in a second. But we have in our training portfolio 7 training courses here. The rounded rectangles, the little orange round circles, by the way, just denote you get a certificate. And the course I want to focus in on is this one, Data Storytelling Best Practice and Principles, which is not about Power BI at all. It's toolset agnostic, and it talks about how to lay dashboards out, how we choose charts, these types of things. And it's probably the most important course in our portfolio, because if you don't understand that, there's no point even getting the data correct, because as we'll find out from Nick soon, probably your dashboards will fail. And this course was put together many years ago after I attended training with a gentleman called Stephen Few. So Stephen Few was one of the forefathers in the data visualization principles arena. And when I went on his training, it was completely bowled me over. It was like a slap round the face. I hadn't realized before that training that there was any science behind this stuff around how you choose charts or choose color, how you lay things out on a screen. And I was horrified to find that I was doing a lot of things not very well. So that day really captured my imagination, or a couple of days, and I went on to read all of Stephen's books and books by many other authors, including those of Nick. So Nick was also taught by Stephen, and then when Stephen retired, Nick was the first and only educator to be authorized by Stephen to deliver his training. So Nick did that for a few years and then developed his own training courses in practical charts and practical dashboards, and then went on to write books. Practical charts, more practical charts, and practical dashboards is due to be delivered next year. So we are very proud to partner with Nick. Nick came over last year to deliver his training in person, and that was very, very successful. And he's coming back again this November, and I'll talk more about that at the end. But with that, Nick, I don't know if you'd like to add anything to your introduction, but I'd be interested to hear a little bit about how you got into data visualization yourself.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess kind of a similar kind of workshop experience. My first exposure was through Stephen Pugh. I took one of his workshops in 2013, and very same kind of reaction, like just absolutely mind blowing. Really kind of as you said, really made me aware of the fact that this is not just kind of the sort of ad hoc, intuition based thing. That there are best practices, there's science, there's research behind this, and so I kind of stayed in touch with Steve while after that, and then basically got laid off. And my first call when I got laid off about a year after that was to Steve, because I had always thought about teaching his workshops, and then he kind of basically agreed, because a lot of what we had been talking about in the interim was actually, a lot of psychology, a lot of philosophy. I've always had kind of a strong interest in the psychology of perception and judgment and biases, and really that's kind of what he taught. People think, oh, they do sort of technological workshops. Really, they're much more about kind of psychology. And so he ended up training me to teach his courses, as you mentioned. I did that from 2014 to about 2019, which is when Steve retired. He encouraged me to write my own books, develop my own courses, which I, of course, have been doing since then. But I'm still in touch with Steve all the time. He's doing well, in case anybody has met Steve before. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Do give him my regards next time you speak to him. And I always struggle, Nick, with what you call what you do, if it's a discipline. I think data visualization, people do put a technical bent on that. What would you call it?
In terms of like the my sort of expertise, or
yeah, would you call it data visualization principles, or just data visualization?
Yeah, I mean, well, when I'm describing the practical charts course, I just say it's a data visualization fundamentals course. And the way that I sort of position it with respect to things like data storytelling, for example, or even dashboard design, is that it's kind of what I call sort of the spelling and grammar of data visualization, right? There's always so much talk about like data storytelling and making data beautiful, even in certain cases, which is great, it's important. But in my mind, there's sort of a precursor to that, which is understanding the basic kind of, what I call the spelling and grammar of data visualization, chart type selection, color selection, because so often I see that there are potentially great sort of insights and data stories out there, but they're kind of tripped up by the fact that they have sort of basic, I know it's kind of a loaded term, but basic kind of data visualization mistakes that people make. And and so that's kind of like reading a document that's full of spelling and grammatical errors, right? Like pretty soon people are just going to stop reading, or if they continue to read, they're just going to get really confused. And so, and I think there is now quite a significant awareness out there that, if you want to communicate clearly through charts, there are, these fundamental, kind of best practices that need to be learned first. And it's very analogous to learning a language in a lot of ways, like learning a new language. And so it does take a bit of time. My practical charts course, when I delivered in person, is 2 full days. Online, it's 4 half days. And it's, like I said, it just takes some time to learn these. I talk about actually 50 chart types in that course, because I think that that's sort of the minimum, what I call the minimum vocabulary that you need of chart types in order to communicate effectively. Just like when you're learning a new language, right? Like you have to have a certain minimum vocabulary in order to be well understood. And so, if there is kind of something that, in terms of how I sort of fit myself into the ecosystem, I think it's there. It's sort of at the beginning. It's like, yes, learn about data storytelling, learn about, creating, having impact in the organization, making data-driven decisions. But a necessary kind of precursor to that is just knowing the fundamentals, right? The basics, so that your basic communication is going to be well understood. And of course, you're not going to accidentally misrepresent the data. Which unfortunately is really easy to do. You're well aware of just how easy it is for, you see things all the time where you're like, I don't think the audience would get the right impression from this data. And so just like, learning to sort of write correctly and clearly, it's really easy. Like if you don't have good writing skills, to actually be misunderstood, if you were to ask the audience afterwards, what did you get from this? Like if you ask them, basic questions about the data or about the information they're communicating, they would give you wrong answers. And so, when I started teaching these skills, more than 10 years ago, there was much less of an awareness of that, that there are sort of fundamental best practices around data visualization that need to be learned. Now it's different. Now there's a much broader realization that, oh yeah, if I want to, create effective charts, there's a skill set there that I need to learn, and it's not something I can pick up in an hour. I do get asked sometimes, like, can we just have the light version of the course? It's like 2 hours or something, and I'm like, I wish you could learn the fundamentals of data visualization in 2 hours. But, after basically kind of making it as streamlined as possible, the tightest I could get it down to in order to just equip people with just enough information to communicate kind of reliably and clearly and compellingly was basically 14 hours, right? That's the duration of the practical charts course.
Thanks, Nick. That's a really good background. So let's get to the crux of the matter then. Why do you say so many dashboards fail?
Yeah, so there's, I think there's sort of a constellation of reasons. I don't think there's a single reason. And so, yeah, I've kind of put together some slides. Maybe now would be a good time for me to share those. Just to kind of talk about that, like, why, yeah, can you see my screen?
Yep.
I can. Thumbs up, everybody.
I hope everyone can see. All right. So, so yeah, and this is kind of the sort of the dirty little secret of the dashboard world, which is that, yeah, unfortunately, I would say even a significant majority of dashboards die. When they, when we launch the dashboard, it's, people are checking it out. Everybody's very excited. It's like, oh yeah, this is great. But then a month later, 3 months later, if we have analytics installed on the dashboard, it's telling us that actually, usage has just tanked. People might check it once in a while, but they're just not checking it, nearly as often as we had, would have hoped or liked. Or, people are using it, but they, they don't like it. They're using it, they're tolerating it, or they're using it because they have to. But yeah, they're not really kind of, they're not fans of it. So it's actually quite rare that dashboards meet people's expectations, that people are satisfied with them. And so, yeah, worth asking, of course, why. Like I said, there's no single reason, I think, that explains why dashboards die. There's this whole variety of reasons in my experience. And this is after working with, I don't know how many, companies, but, certainly I've, at least 50, when I was doing a lot of consulting work, I worked for over 50 companies, and I just saw these problems, over and over and over again, basically. And so given the sort of limited time that we have on this call, I can only talk about a few of them. I can talk about maybe sort of the first, sort of 4 or 5. Like, for example, really, probably the biggest reason I think my dashboards die has to do with what I call action indicators or sentiment indicators, where, either the dashboard doesn't have any, right? It's just numbers, and I'll show an example of that in a moment. Or, the indicators that tell basically, or trying to tell the user kind of what requires attention, what's good or bad, are just not informative. Or, I call Christmas tree syndrome. And again, I'll show an example of that. So most of the dashboards that I see out there kind of in the wild look something like this, right? There are no sentiment indicators, no action indicators. Probably over 80% of the dashboards that I see when I go into organizations look like this, right? It's just, here are the numbers. There's nothing on here to tell me, is this a good day? Is this a bad day? What here requires attention? And that's really important, right? Because, I mean, there are many reasons why people ask for dashboards, but in my experience, 75% of the time, the reason is the same, right? Which is basically that people are asking themselves 2 questions. How are we doing? And does anything require my attention? And if so, what, right? There are other reasons why people ask for dashboards, but 75% of the time, that's basically what it boils down to. They might not be using those words, but they're basically asking for a dashboard, typically because something bad has happened in the past and nobody noticed, right? Because the old dashboard didn't do a good job of flagging it as a problem. And so they're like, well, we don't want that to happen again. And so they then ask for a dashboard. But if we give them a dashboard that looks something like this dashboard makes what I call the deadly assumption, which is that our users basically have detailed background knowledge about all of these numbers, and they can figure out which ones are good or bad and what actually requires attention, right? Is that a safe assumption? Virtually never, right? I mean, they probably have some background knowledge about some of these numbers, but most of them, okay, so late delivery rate is 12.5% here. Good, bad, is this a problem I need to address? I don't know. And so, why are people going to continue to use a dashboard that consists mostly of what they basically perceive as kind of random numbers, right? Now, like I said, 80% of dashboards that I see in the wild basically fall into this category. And so to me, right away, if I see a dashboard like this, I'm like, this dashboard is probably going to die simply because there are no indicators. Now, 10, 20% of the dashboards that I see in the wild do have indicators. The most common type would be something like this, right? So basically showing change versus previous period. And so here we have now added indicators for change versus, in this case, the previous day, but it might be the previous month or same month last year, but it's the same idea. And so in theory, this is supposed to tell us, are these numbers good or bad? What requires attention, right? So, how are we doing today? Is good day or bad day here in operations? I don't know, like it's always just going to be kind of this mix of red and green indicators. So even that basic question is kind of hard to answer. All right, so let's try and answer that second big question, which is what requires attention, right? Well, apparently everything, because unless the current value of a metric happens to be exactly the same as the previous value, it's going to get flagged, which basically means we're flagging everything all the time. And so I have a very technical term for this. I call it Christmas tree syndrome because our dashboard is lit up red and green, except in this case, it's Christmas 365 days a year because our dashboard always looks like this. And so flagging everything is basically the same as flagging nothing, right? And so, and there are other problems as well with this method, but really this is not particularly helpful for users. For example, okay, so, Chardonnay here is down, 3.9%. Well, for some metrics, being down, 3.9% since the previous day might be a disaster. And for others, it might be nothing, right? And so, I can't even sort of say, well, for big deviations like this, maybe these require attention, maybe they don't, right? Or maybe, we had a big spike yesterday and now we're just back to baseline, in which case it's like, this doesn't require attention. And so, yeah, unfortunately, even though this is very, very common, it's actually not very helpful. Probably the second most common method is basically showing deviation from target, right? Now, of course, you've seen this before, right? We set target values for all of our metrics, which of course takes time. And then we show the percentage deviation, 3% above target, 3% below target. But once again, if I try and ask that question, how are we doing? Is today a good day or a bad day in operations? It's going to, again, be tough to tell because it's just this kind of mix of red and green indicators. What requires attention? Apparently everything all the time, right? So we basically have the same problem because unless the current value happens to be identical to the target, which is usually not the case, then it gets flagged. And so we're basically, once again, flagging everything all the time. And so, having seen these problems just over and over and over again in the organizations that I was consulting with, I ended up taking quite a different approach. And so, the kinds of dashboards that I show on my practical dashboards course look like this. And so, even without me sort of explaining anything, you can probably guess what's going on here, right? Well, most metrics don't require attention. So what kind of day are we having? Pretty kind of normal day. But, what actually does require attention? Boom, 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 immediately I can spot what requires attention. And oh, look at this. We also have some numbers here that appear to be doing sort of remarkably well. And so it seems so basic, but this is like essentially, the first of the examples that we've seen that doesn't suffer from Christmas tree syndrome, right? Like we're not flagging everything all the time, which seems so basic. Obvious question, how did we decide, or how did the dashboard decide where to put, light red dots or medium or dark red dots? And so this is based on an approach that I call action dots. And so for action dots, essentially for each one of our metrics, in this case, calls answered per hour, we're going to set 4 thresholds. So the first one is called crisis. And as you can probably guess, this has a very specific definition, which is, if it ever got this bad, we would essentially drop everything. Like this would become our one and only priority until this was addressed, until this was fixed. And so, this is a lot more kind of precise than a term like poor. Like sometimes, of course, you'll see good, satisfactory, poor ranges. But what does poor mean? Poor can mean like a big problem, a small problem, the point at which I don't get my bonus, right? There's all sorts of ways to interpret that. But crisis has this very kind of specific definition, which means that it's relatively easy for people to kind of, assign a number to it. And then we have actionably bad. And so this is the point where, if it got this low, I wouldn't be just concerned. I would be so concerned that I would do something about it. I would launch an investigation. I would cancel a project. I would take some kind of action. And then there's kind of the mirror image of that, which is called actionably good. As you can imagine, this is the point where, if it ever got this high, I wouldn't just be pleased. I would be so pleased that I would do something about it. I would, promote somebody. I would move more funding into the project. I would actually take some kind of action. And then the fourth and final kind of threshold is called best case. And so, as you can imagine, this is essentially the point where, realistically, how good do we think this metric could ever get? It'll probably never get there, but if it ever did, we would want that to be very noticeable on the dashboard. And that's essentially how we, how these sort of dot colors come about. Now, and anything that, of course, falls in between actionably bad and actionably good doesn't get a dot because by definition, it requires no action, right? Because that's what these terms actually mean. And so in the real world, in practice, what this means is that, in fact, most metrics will not get a dot most of the time because that's reality, right? Most metrics actually don't require action most of the time. And so if you think back to, the two first kind of methods that we saw, change versus previous period or deviation from target, those make it look like every metric requires action all the time, but that's the kind of the opposite of reality. And so using this method, like I said, if it's done right, we're actually not flagging most things most of the time. Of course, these thresholds can and invariably will change over time. What we consider to be a crisis 6 or 12 months ago is probably not the same as what we consider to be a crisis today. And so these metrics, or these thresholds basically can and should be adjusted over time. Now, as you can imagine, we're not going to have time to actually set these 4 thresholds for like all of the metrics that we actually care about. And so again, in my practical dashboards course, I have some actually like surprisingly simple statistics that I provide. There's a spreadsheet model that participants get where you can essentially calculate reasonable default for threshold levels for a given metric based on sort of at least sort of 5 or 10 historical values for that metric. And so, when it comes to a dashboard like this, probably, we'll be setting some of these thresholds manually for, the really sort of, metrics that we consider to be most important. But for a lot of them, we'll just set the 4 thresholds kind of automatically using those relatively simple statistics. And so, like I said, something like this is actually, almost unique in, kind of the world of methods for flagging metrics that require attention, because we're actually getting rid of the Christmas tree. And virtually all other methods that I've seen, things like deviation from trailing average or good, satisfactory, poor ranges, they all, like I said, they all kind of flag everything all the time. And so using this method, I think, I know for sure I've seen many users react to it in very positive ways because we're only flagging things that actually require attention. And so when the CEO here, because this is a sample CEO dashboard, when they log in the morning and they see something like this, even though it looks like remarkably boring, once they know about these action dots, to them, this is like the sexiest damn dashboard they've ever seen, because it's like, what is this telling them? Everything's okay. Like everything is okay. Nothing requires attention. How much time did it take for them to figure that out? Less than 1 second, right? A typical dashboard, this might have taken them half an hour or an hour to sift through all the metrics and see, what actually requires attention. If they log in and see something like this, however, immediately they know, oh, this is going to be a bad day, because if this many metrics are actually flagged, it means that, it's hit the fan, like something's, has gone horribly wrong, that's affecting multiple aspects of the organization. But once again, how long did it take me to actually figure that out? Less than 1 second. Like right away, I know it's going to be a bad day. And then, okay, lots of problems, but at least I know where to start, right? Go for the darkest red dots first. And then once those are under control, then I can go for the medium and lighter red ones. And so, like I said, this is, can be pretty life altering for users. More work for you guys. I assume most of you are dashboard designers and developers. And of course, this is going to be, sort of more work for you, but we're basically taking on that work so that our users don't have to do that work themselves. And, we're not saying here, you figure out what is good or bad or how we're doing. We're going to build intelligence into the dashboard that does that for you. And so that's probably the number one reason, or reasons, this sort of cluster of reasons why dashboards die. There are a few others, and I think I have time to maybe talk about maybe 2 more, which has to do with essentially, metrics that require action are just not on the dashboard, or they are on the dashboard, but they're hidden behind filters. And so, this is sort of a pretty typical conventional dashboard. A lot of you might look at a dashboard like this and say, yeah, this looks fine, right? I don't see anything obviously wrong with this. I look at it though, and I mean, well, the first thing I notice is that there's no action or sentiment indicators, which right away tells me that this dashboard's probably going to die. But there are other problems in this case as well, right? So I have these filters down the side. And so, it looks like there are these 4 different metrics, right? I have revenue and profit units sold. But the thing is, if I want to see, okay, so, were there any problems, anything that I need to pay attention to, what am I going to have to do? I'm going to have to basically click on all of these every day and see, is there a problem with revenue? Is there a problem with profit? Is there a problem with units sold? And so are people going to do that? Probably not. But it gets worse, right? Because I have all these other filters too, right? I can filter by category and company and region. And this is fine for lookup, right? If I just want to see, okay, what was our profit, for the coffee? Well, or actually, no, tea, we'll take tea because we're talking about the UK here, in the central region. If I just want to look that up, no problem, right? Filter, 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 there's my answer. But if I want to do the things that we were talking about before, i.e. answer those key questions, what requires attention here? How are we doing? Are there any problems that I need to be aware of? I would have to literally click on all of these every day or every week or every month. Nobody's going to do that, which means that there are going to be many problems that occur in the organization, which are simply not going to get noticed. There's also the fact that I'm showing a very small number of metrics here. There's eight metrics, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's not very many, right? There are probably other metrics that could indicate problems that genuinely require my attention, but they're just not here, right? Not on the dashboard. And so if I come back to my CEO dashboard here, well, one of the other differences here is that I'm showing way more information, right? I'm looking at, I don't know, I haven't counted them, but it's probably 50 or something metrics, which is way more than 8. And so right away, there's a much greater chance that if there is a problem somewhere in the organization, it's going to show up on the dashboard. Now, as you can see, right, it looks like we have some problems in operations here. And so, but I'm only basically looking at a very small amount of information related to operations. I just have these 5 metrics. But I want to know more, right? I want to be able to dig in and see, okay, tell me more about operations. Well, wouldn't it be cool if the user could do this? Click on operations, and now I go to a whole dashboard, a whole page about operations, right? So here we have the operations dashboard. And so much more detailed than the 4 or 5 metrics that I've seen before. And so I can see, yes, okay, so we have really some problems in the kind of manufacturing area of operations, specifically around defect rate. But I can only really see a little bit of information around defect rate, right? Just essentially a breakdown by product model. But what about a breakdown by manufacturing plant or shift? I mean, there's all sorts of ways that I could sort of break down defect rate. Again, wouldn't it be cool if I could do something like this? Just click on defect rate, boom. And now I'm going to an entire dashboard. This is the units manufactured dashboard, because that's where defect rate kind of came from. And so now I see defect rate broken down by everything, right? By product model, by manufacturing plant, by shift, etc. I also see sort of related metrics, things like units manufactured, production time, that might help me understand if there is a problem with defect rate, what is going on here. And so I can see, oh yes, look at this. The defect rate is really being dragged down by this one product, this one manufacturing plant. The CEO, of course, may never drill down to this level, but they could, right? They could, and all they're doing is basically just kind of following the dots, right? And so if there are problems, that's kind of the main takeaway here. If there are problems out there, anywhere in the organization, using this sort of paradigm, this new sort of approach that I have, it will, the users are much more likely to actually spot those problems. And so in my little sort of UX walkthrough here, I actually showed you 3 types of dashboards. That CEO dashboard was an example of what I call a role dashboard. As you can imagine, this is a dashboard which is targeted at a specific role, like the CEO, regional manager, account representative, those are all roles. And then we went to the operations dashboard, which is an example of what I call an area dashboard, which of course is a dashboard about an area of the organization. And an area can be anything, right? It can be a region, it can be a department. In this case, it's operations. And then we went to the units manufactured dashboard, which is an example of what I call an entity dashboard. And so an entity dashboard is a dashboard about a single type of thing, right? It's a dashboard about our customers, about our transactions, about our products. It basically it's a dashboard that is based off of a single table, essentially, within our database system. Our users do not have to understand any of this. To them, this basically kind of behaves and looks like a news website, right? So we have a front page, which is basically like a role dashboard. It doesn't have all the news on it, but it has kind of a selection of news. But it also has sections, right? Politics, technology. And if I click on those, then I go to entire pages about those sections, which are basically like area dashboards. If I click on an individual story, that's like clicking on an individual metric. I go to an entire page about that story or about that metric. And so users don't have to learn how to do this. They already know, right? We're just adopting a paradigm that they've been using for a long time. And so, as you can imagine, especially for higher level roles like, CEO or vice presidents, that kind of thing, this is pretty life altering, but it also works really well even for kind of lower mid-level roles as well. So, like I said, because our time is so limited, and I do want to allow some time for Q&A, because I think there's some questions piling up. I can see in the chat. But just so you know, of course, this is the taste, right? Like I tried to make my practical dashboards course as short as possible, but I could only get it down to 2 days because there are lots of other things to talk about, lots of other reasons why dashboards die. And so there's a variety of reasons why this, like is a variety of strategies that are needed to deal with this. One of them, and a key one, is understanding that there are different types of dashboards, right? And I sort of, in my course, I have kind of a taxonomy with 2 sort of high-level categories, right? And each of these contains different types of dashboards. Those are the ones we just saw, right? Entity, area, and role dashboards, which are in kind of a subfamily of, what I call tactical dashboards. But there are other types that, unfortunately, I won't have time to get into today, like overview dashboards, which are kind of, dashboards that provide a very quick overview, mostly to board members or people who don't need kind of a tactical view. And then there are strategic dashboards for showing KPIs, but a very small number targeted KPIs for basically strategic planning meetings. Canned analysis dashboards, and then we have static data dashboards, which are based on a static snapshot of data. So these are dashboards that are typically not updated. And there are 3 types of those. And so in the course, I basically talk about how to design all of these because, one of the problems I see out there that people I'm assuming, most people on this call face is that when we're talking about dashboard design best practices, it's almost impossible to have that conversation unless we first define, well, what kind of dashboard are we actually talking about? And so in the Practical Dashboards course, that's basically what we do is we go through each of these types and talk about how to design each of them. And, if you end up taking the course, you'll see that the best practices are very, very different depending on what kind of dashboard we're talking about. So like I said, I did want to leave some time for questions. And so, but by all means, if you have any questions that we don't manage to get to in the webinar, then do feel free to reach out to Ian or myself.
Thank you,
Fantastic.
Nick. Kelsey, I think you've been looking at the questions. We are going to, yeah, we probably can just take a few now, and then we'll come back to as many as we possibly can. But I did see there's some themes as well. So, Kelsey.
Yeah, we're going to get started with a couple of questions that came in at registration. Thank you to those who submitted their questions in advance. We'll do a bit of those questions and the questions that appear in the Q&A as well. So the first questions I have are from Samuel Epley. He has 3 questions, but maybe a couple of them you've answered already, Nick. Why do you think so many dashboards end up getting ignored, even when it feels like we did everything right? And what's one mistake you see all the time that makes a dashboard?
I have a terrible working memory, so I'm just going to ask you ask you one at a time.
That's okay.
Gray hair.
Yeah. So why do you think so many dashboards end up getting ignored, even when it feels like we did everything right?
Yeah. I mean, so of course I did touch on a few of the reasons. But yeah, those are probably the two biggest ones. Is no sentiment indicators, and then people are just like, well, I don't know what most of these numbers mean, and so then they just stop using the dashboard. And then of course, the fact that so many problems just are not visible by default on the dashboard. The metrics kind of didn't fit because we only put like 8 metrics on the dashboard when there should have been like 50 or 60. And so what happens in these situations, of course, is that then the new dashboard launches, but it's only got like 8 metrics on it, and most of everything else is hidden behind filters. And then invariably something bad happens soon after in the organization, but nobody notices, right? The dashboard didn't make it obvious that something was going wrong, and so then the problem doesn't get noticed. It gets worse and kind of festers until it finally blows up, and then of course somebody finally notices. But now you're in damage control mode. And so once the fires are put out, then they go back and look at the dashboard and say, well, why should I keep on looking at this if it didn't even tell me about this horrible problem? And so then they're like, I'm not going to use it. Like I'm too busy. But I mean, there are other reasons. One of them, for example, is what I call the Swiss Army knife problem, where essentially we try to cram too many capabilities into a single dashboard. Like, for example, we want a dashboard that can be used by like many different roles, or a dashboard that can be used for kind of day-to-day problem spotting, but that's the same dashboard that we're going to use in our quarterly management planning meeting, where we're going to try and sort of plan out the next 3 months or whatever. It's like trying to design a single dashboard for those different, very, very different use cases. What you end up with is a Swiss Army knife, which is essentially a tool that does many things poorly, right? And so that's why I have this taxonomy that I showed at the end, right? It's one of the big things I do when I consult, when I teach, is I get people to pull dashboards apart. And so, don't try and create the one dashboard to rule them all. Have basically kind of a system of dashboards, and then things are going to get a lot easier.
That's great. I think that sort of answers Sophia's question about, not knowing what metrics are really relevant. Recommending starting with only a few metrics and building on it, depending on what the users tell users metrics they need, instead of cluttering the dashboard. So really splitting the metrics apart into relevant dashboards that are answered the different questions, if you like.
Yeah.
The next question from Sam is, what's one mistake you see all the time that makes a dashboard look slick but actually makes it worse for the user? I'll open that up to yourself and maybe Ian, if you've got any comments on that as well.
Yeah. I mean, that is something that is unfortunately a common misconception, is that people think that the reason why their dashboard isn't working well is because it's not pretty enough, right? It doesn't look slick enough. And so, and oftentimes when I'm brought in as a consultant, because things aren't going well, right? They just spend a lot of time and money on a dashboard and people don't like it, or they're not using it. They think that's what I'm going to do, right? I'm going to come in and I'm going to change the background color to black, and I'm going to, add more white space or change the typefaces or something like that. And somehow that's going to make things better. But as I hope I showed, like really it goes invariably much deeper than that. The problems are generally not with the cosmetics. That's not why your dashboard is not being, people don't like it. But even though sometimes users will tell you, right, say, oh, if the dashboard basically looks cooler, then somehow that's going to be, people are going to like it more. But like in my experience, it actually makes things worse, right? For example, if you make the background black, then it makes it much harder to actually flag metrics that require attention. And so, or just another really common problem is essentially randomizing chart types. People think, oh, my initial dashboard was like all line charts or all bar charts. Let's mix it up, right? Let's throw a map in there and, maybe some pie charts or a tree map or something like that. But again, that's not actually going to engage users. It's just going to confuse them. So yeah, unfortunately, there are lots of ways that people try to they get a little desperate when people don't like the dashboard, or they start adding like lots of colors because they think that that's going to get people's attention. But that just, again, makes it really hard to highlight things. So yeah. As you saw, like the dashboard that I showed, that operations dashboard, it reflects my design philosophy for that type of dashboard anyways, which I call boring with highlights. There's a reason for that, right? We want a boring base layer so that we can actually highlight things that require attention. And that's actually very interesting to users, right? As opposed to just randomizing chart types, which is not interesting to users.
Yeah, I'd absolutely reinforce that. In fact, on data storytelling best practice and principles course, we talk about design being a balance of form and function, and you'll see dashboards that are ugly and don't function very well, but more often than not, I think the balance is out of balance, and there's a lot of attention on the way it looks and eye candy and decoration, and not much thought goes into the functioning and the psychology there. So I'm going to interrupt the questions because I know some people will have to leave. It's great to see so much activity, so much interest. The chat's going mad. I know Kelsey's got a list of questions as long as her arm. We're not going to be able to get through them all. We will try to get back to you on some of those questions. Maybe we'll run this session again, but maybe we'll have time to get back to some questions before 1 o'clock as well. But I just wanted to give you some pointers towards next steps, which I've got up on the screen at the moment. So On the left there are Nick's books. I thoroughly recommend that as a starting point. Practical charts and more practical charts. And then Nick's training. Nick has online on-demand training, on live training, and in-person training. And as I said, Nick is coming to the UK, to London in November. I'll tell you a bit more about that on the next slide. You can go to all of those on our website. There is a page on the website just for Nick's education there. If you buy through our website, you will get discounts, except for the books. So you get 10% on live online workshops or the on-demand training. And if you are able to dedicate budget now, you can have 20% discount for the November training. So all of that's there. We'll put our website address in the chat, but there's a QR code there as well. We can also offer a couple of courses. There's been a lot of talk about Power BI in the chat. How do you do this stuff in Power BI? We've got two courses. So our data storytelling best practice and principles course. It was interesting, Nick, hearing you talk earlier about the grammar of education and how you've the grammar of data visualization and the spelling and how you've tried to condense it. Yeah, in our course, it's over 2 half days, our data storytelling best practice, and we can teach you how to speak pigeon data visualization, if you like. We can only introduce you to chart selection. We go through 5 charts rather than 50 charts, 5 very basic high-level charts, line charts, bar charts, these types of things, but not into all the variations of them. We wouldn't have time. Also, there's a lot of people that say, how do you do this stuff in Power BI? Or I can't do that in Power BI. Well, we have a course that tells you how to do that stuff in Power BI. We have 2 courses, one around the tips, tricks and pitfalls in Power BI, which delves into a little bit of data storytelling best practice and principles, and one on just more advanced techniques of drill throughs and tooltips, etc. A lot of people have attended those courses that are on the training today. Big thumbs up if you like them, or feel free to tell everybody how great they are in the chat. Yeah, but we do get very good feedback on that training. Also, coaching and consulting. So a dashboard usability audit. Have you done that? I think Kelsey's got some questions around those sorts of things. In order to be able to do good data storytelling with Power BI, you definitely need a good theme and template. The defaults in Power BI out of the box will not do data visualization best practices. I know you don't like that term, Nick, but I always struggle to find something else. So you need a good Power BI theme and a good template, and we can help you with those. We've spent many years developing our Power BI theme and template, and we make that available to our clients through coaching engagements. We can help you with dashboard redesign and design templates. Again, please visit our website or just send us an email. So this is Nick's training in London, hoping to see loads of people there. It'd be nice to go into the council chambers on the right there this year if we get enough people registering. But it's a lovely venue. A lot of filming's been done there as well. So yeah, the QR code there if you would like to register for that one, and we'll give you the link. Kelsey will send you all an email later today with a lot of these links as well. I did manage to rattle through that fairly quickly. We do have a survey for you as well. So again, please do that. We'd like to know what you think sort of this webinar and what webinars you'd like us to do in the future. I think this one we will definitely do in the future again. Kelsey, back to you for any more questions.
Yeah, we do have quite a lot of questions coming through. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, sorry, actually, just
yeah.
you know, for anybody who might be kind of leaving now, I'll be happy to actually answer these questions in kind of written form. And so, like, if you're, I assume anyway, subscribe to Ian's newsletter or my email newsletter, I'll probably send them out, you know, in that list as well, because I'm seeing there's a lot of great questions that have come up. Hopefully, we'll have time to answer maybe 1 or 2 before the end. But yeah, I'm happy to to answer all of them in written form. Just make sure, I guess, you're on Ian's or my email list.
Thanks, Nick. Yep, I'll be collating all the questions that have come through either through the register or in the Q&A and the chat session. I think we do have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. I'm going to go to the Q&A. Question from Rebecca that's received the most votes. Is there a framework you recommend for helping stakeholders narrow down what they actually need rather than wanting everything? I'll open that to both of you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I talk about this in the dashboard course. The thing is, though, so once again, it does depend on the kind of dashboard that you're talking about. And so for these, what I call tactical dashboards, like the CEO dashboard and the operations dashboard that I showed, the nice thing about those dashboards is that we can put much more information on them, and so we don't have to be so kind of artificially restrictive, right? And so the kind of, it's not really a framework. It's actually just a simple question that I used when we're talking about tactical dashboards and deciding, okay, does this metric belong on a tactical dashboard? The question that I use when I ask users is, do we need this metric on the dashboard? Is this a metric where you personally would need to take a specific action in response to that metric? And so because that's a lot more useful than asking the typical question, which is, what is this metric important, right? What is the answer to that question 100% of the time? Yes, right? And so it's not very useful as a question. And so this better question is like, is this a metric where you personally would need to take a specific action? And so in my experience, that only turns out to be a yes, maybe like 60% of the time. And so you can actually get rid of a lot of metrics, that just don't pass that test. But you will legitimately end up with a long list afterwards. And those metrics are genuinely important. Like, you do actually need to put them all on the dashboard, which is why in those dashboards that I showed, there were so many of them, 50, 60 numbers, because that's, in 2025, that's reality. Even not even somebody senior, even like just a team manager or somebody, a mid-level manager, that's their reality now. There are many, many numbers that they are responsible for. And if any one of them goes south, then they need the dashboard to tell them. But things change when we're talking about what I call a strategic dashboard, which is basically a one-pager that's used as sort of a guide during the monthly or quarterly, management planning discussion, which has maybe 10 or 12 kind of KPIs on it. There's a whole other, sort of set of topics around that, like how do you choose those KPIs? But now it's different. Right now, it's not just like, could you personally need to take a specific action based on this metric? It's what are the numbers that we are going to basically collectively agree to as the ways to evaluate our strategic performance. And that's just entirely different, right? Because now we're talking about a different kind of dashboard.
Thanks, Nick. I think we are almost out of time.
We are. I think we're gonna have to wrap up there. We could keep going for another hour. We will get back to you. There's over the next, bear with us because there's a lot to sift through, but we will answer your questions as quick as we can. And I think we'll definitely have to run this one again, so we'll get it scheduled. And of course, if you want to talk to us separately, please do that. Yeah. And just to quickly answer Lucy's question, can we have a Q&A roundup on the follow-up email with the answers? As we may not have asked the question, but someone else has and would like to know the answers, we'll definitely try and include that either in today's end of day email or in an additional email with those information specifically. Any other comments from yourselves, Ian and Nick? Just like to thank you, Nick, for getting up early out there in Canada. We much appreciate it. And looking forward to seeing you in November, but I think we'll be running another one of these before then if you have time. So thank you. Of course. Yeah. No, they're great questions. So let's plan another one. It was great participation in this one. Well over 100 people. Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to end the event now and hope to chat with some of you going forwards. Yeah, and thanks Ian and Kelsey for hosting. No problem at all. Thanks, everyone. Have a fantastic weekend. We hope to see you all very soon.